The Mind Liberation by Venerable Rung Ruang Papas Saro, Dr. Rung Ruang Lim Chupatipa. A cycle of the process of dependent origination is considered as one completion of changing from one state formation to another state formation in one cycle of the birth and death of the object of consciousness. The interval time from birth aging to death of the object of consciousness generates a single frame of perception, and after the volitional formations, the mind will generate the next new frame of perception. While the mind processes each frame of perception of the subject of consciousness one by one, each frame is switched from frame to frame so fast that the continuation of each frame in perception constitutes the persistence of perception, making continuous movements of objects in thinking. As the mind continues in the process of dependent origination in many cycles, the finest defilement becomes more complex, starting from the identity of being someone by assuming a self to be engaged with the object of consciousness, then causing the dysfunction of the mind in the first round of the process of dependent origination with desire and lust. After that, the whole mind processing is dominated by such a self in the five aggregates subject to self, and then the mind keeps on generating a new object of consciousness in association with the self with desire and lust. This problem is escalated by several rounds of the process of dependent origination to become the unwholesome thought of the middle defilement of the five lower fetters, namely pleasure desire, ill will, depression, anxiety, and doubt, and then this problem is aggravated to be the emotional rough defilement of greed, hatred, and delusion before bursting into evil doing. The Buddha explained that because of our assumption to be someone as a self to be engaged with the object of consciousness with desire and lust, the mind banished from the reality that such an object of consciousness had already faded away by nature, and the mind kept on engaging with the matter by generating a new similar object of consciousness to proceed with the process of dependent origination with ignorance. In fact, the object of consciousness has already risen and faded away. Whatsoever happening in the world is real, but it is no self. However, because of this ignorance, the mind still internally generates a new similar object of consciousness to resume the mind processing with the five aggregates subject to clinging with desire and lust, including the possessiveness of everything subject to self in the volitional formations, and then the matter turns out to be the unwholesome thought of the five lower fetters. As the mind keeps on processing in this matter, the unwholesome becomes more complex and serious with emotion, and then the mind turns out to become emotions with greed, hatred, and delusion before bursting out in evil doing. In Buddhism, a person is good or bad, not because of having a good spirit or a bad spirit, but because it is the information of the individuality of karma stored in the memory of the latent dispositions of the individual person that is mixed in the volitional formations of the process of dependent origination. No one, not even God, can bless or make anyone be a good or bad person by dictation. The Buddha suggests that there is nothing more important than making a study on the truths of life within nature. The Buddha was not concerned with the God, and he never mentioned the God, but he encouraged his followers to make a good study on life rightly. The holistic view of the dynamic aggravation of defilements under the process of dependent origination and the threefold study strategy to resolve the problem. Clearly, the object of consciousness in the first round of the process of dependent origination is stimulus from the world, but after that, in the next other rounds of the process of dependent origination, the mind will generate various internal objects of consciousness to drive the mind processing. The problem being aggravated within the process of dependent origination can be classified into three levels depending on the complexities of problems. Firstly, starting with the taint of the finest defilement that occurred in the first round of the process of dependent origination. Secondly, the unwholesome thoughts of the five lower fetters of the middle defilements. And thirdly, the emotions of the rough defilements with greed, hatred, and delusion before bursting out into evil doing. In the Four Noble Truths analysis, once we are able to identify the problem and understand the root cause of the problem, then we find the path and way to resolve the problem rightly. The Buddha introduced the threefold study strategy to study the mind to gain wisdom and then make use of the wisdom for the destruction of the problem. In the threefold study strategy in Buddhism, the emotional rough defilement of greed, hatred, and delusion can be destructed by moral study, while the middle defilement of unwholesome thought can be destructed by mind study, and the finest defilement of the dysfunction of mind processing can be destructed by wisdom development. By establishing mindfulness to abandon unwholesome thoughts, the mind is glad, and then dependent on gladness, rapture arises. Dependent on rapture arise bodily and mind seclusions. Dependent on bodily and mind seclusions arises happiness. Dependent on happiness arises the right concentration. Dependent on the right concentration arises insight. Dependent on insight arises the knowledge of the process of dependent origination. By applying the Four Noble Truths to each mental phenomenon, analyze the whole system of the process of dependent origination. Dependent on the application of Four Noble Truths on the process of dependent origination arises the knowledge for the destruction of the taints. This is the path and way to enlightenment to gain the knowledge of the destruction of the taints. Clearly, we still have bodily feelings associated with the world. However, the mind becomes disenchanted and becomes dispassionate to the world. Through the dispassion, there is no self to be associated with any internal object of consciousness, and as a result, there is no more internal generating of the object of consciousness, and there is no more mental feeling, and the process of dependent origination will be terminated, so the mind is liberated.